The metal screamed. Glass shattered. Flames licked the night sky. Ethan Miles didn't think he just ran toward the inferno, crowbar in hand, while his terrified son watched from the truck. He pulled her from the wreckage seconds before the car exploded, never knowing this one decision would shatter every wall he'd built around his broken life. Because the unconscious girl bleeding in his arms wasn't just anyone, she was a millionaire's daughter who would soon turn his world upside down. Before we begin, I invite you to stay with us until the very end of this journey. Comment below with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels across the world. The rain came down in sheets that October night, the kind that turned rural highways into black mirrors reflecting nothing but darkness and regret. Ethan Miles gripped the steering wheel of his '98 Ford pickup with hands still stained with engine grease he couldn't quite wash off no matter how hard he scrubbed. The digital clock on the dashboard blinked 11:47 p.m., nearly midnight, and he was just now heading home. "Dad?" The small voice from the passenger seat made Ethan's chest tighten, the way it always did when Noah spoke in that particular tone, half asleep, half worried, entirely too young to be riding shotgun this late at night. "Yeah, buddy. Are we gonna be home soon? I'm tired." Ethan glanced at his son, 8 years old, with sandy brown hair that stuck up in the back, no matter how many times Ethan tried to smooth it down. Noah's backpack sat between his feet, stuffed with the homework he'd been doing in the garage break room, while Ethan finished an emergency repair on Mrs. Henderson's Buick. A single father's reality: your kid does homework on an oil-stained desk while you replace a transmission because the rent is due and the electricity bill doesn't care about bedtimes. 10 more minutes, Ethan said, forcing a smile. Then it's straight to bed. Okay, no negotiations. Can I have cereal first? Noah. Please, just a small bowl, I'm starving. Ethan sighed, but he was already nodding. Fine. But then bed. And you brush your teeth this time, actually brush them. Not just run the toothbrush under water. Noah grinned that gap-toothed smile that made every sacrifice worth it. I always brush them. Uh-huh. Sure you do. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm against the downpour. Route 17 was empty this time of night, just Ethan, his thoughts, and the endless stretch of asphalt cutting through farmland and forest. This was the part of the drive where his mind wandered to places he tried not to go, to the empty side of the bed, to the divorce papers signed 3 years ago, to the dreams he'd folded up and put away in a drawer he never opened anymore. He'd had plans once. Real plans. Engineering school. A career designing things that mattered. But then Sarah got pregnant senior year and suddenly plans became responsibilities. He'd done the right thing, married her. Got a job at Miller's garage, learned to fix what was broken instead of building what was new. And for a while, it was enough. Sarah, Noah, a little house with a yard. Simple, real, until it wasn't. Until Sarah decided small-town life wasn't what she wanted, that Ethan's grease-stained hands and blue-collar paycheck weren't what she'd signed up for. She left on a Tuesday, took half their savings, and none of the responsibility. Said she needed to find herself. Last he heard, she was in California with some marketing executive who drove a Tesla and had never changed his own oil. Noah didn't talk about her much anymore. Sometimes that was a relief. Sometimes it broke Ethan's heart. "Dad, look out!" The shout snapped Ethan back to reality just as headlights exploded around the curve ahead, high beams moving fast, too fast for this weather. A silver sports car, sleek and expensive, fishtailed wildly across the center line. Ethan's foot slammed the brake. The truck skidded, tires screaming against wet pavement. He yanked the wheel hard right, missing the sports car by inches as it careened past them. "Hold on!" Ethan yelled. The truck shuddered to a stop on the shoulder. Through the rain-streaked rear window, Ethan watched in horror as the sports car, still moving at deadly speed, failed to navigate the next turn. It left the road like something launched, sailed through the air in slow motion, and crashed into the drainage ditch with a sound that would haunt Ethan's dreams for months to come. Metal crunching, glass exploding, and then silence. "Dad!" Noah's voice was small, terrified. "Dad, what?" "Stay in the truck." Ethan was already moving, muscle memory taking over. He grabbed the flashlight from the glove box, his hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Noah, listen to me. Stay here. Lock the doors. Do not get out. Understand?" "But, do you understand?" Noah nodded, eyes wide in the darkness. Ethan pushed open the door and ran into the rain. The ditch was maybe 15 feet deep, and the sports car had landed on its roof driver's side, partially submerged in the rushing water that filled the drainage channel. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood. Something was leaking fuel. Ethan's brain registered immediately. Fuel and sparks and water, a recipe for disaster. He half ran, half slid down the muddy embankment, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. When he reached the car, he could see her, a young woman, maybe early 20s, unconscious, and hanging upside down in the driver's seat, held in place by a seatbelt that had probably saved her life. Blood trickled down her face from a cut on her forehead. Her designer dress, something expensive that Ethan couldn't begin to price, was torn and soaked. One of her high heels had come off. She looked like she'd been heading to some fancy party, not racing down a rural highway in the middle of a storm. "Hey!" Ethan pounded on the window. "Can you hear me?" No response. The fuel smell was getting stronger. Through the shattered windshield, he could see smoke beginning to curl from somewhere in the engine compartment. Ethan ran back to his truck, moving fast. Noah had unlocked the door. Of course he had. The kid never listened and was leaning out. "Is she okay? Dad is—" "Get the crowbar from the toolbox, now!" Noah scrambled into the truck bed, pulled out the red toolbox, and extracted the crowbar with shaking hands. Ethan grabbed it and ran back to the wreck. The driver's side door was jammed shut, crushed from the impact. Ethan wedged the crowbar into the gap between the door and the frame, threw all his weight against it. The metal groaned but held. He repositioned, tried again. His shoulders screamed in protest. The rain made everything slippery, harder to grip. "Come on," he muttered through gritted teeth. "Come on, come on!" The door gave way with a shriek of tortured metal. Ethan dropped the crowbar and leaned into the car, the smell of fuel making his eyes water. The woman was still unconscious, breathing, but shallow. He felt for a pulse at her neck there, thready but present. Her arms hung limply above her head, one hand still clutching what looked like a cell phone. "Okay," he said, talking to himself, to her, to God, to anyone who was listening. "Okay, we're getting you out." He knew the risks. Moving someone with potential spinal injuries was dangerous, but leaving her in a car that could explode any second was certain death. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Ethan braced himself against the doorframe and carefully supported her head and neck with one hand while his other hand worked the seatbelt release. The mechanism was jammed. Of course it was. Nothing was ever easy. He pulled out his pocket knife and sawed through the belt, catching her weight as it gave way. She was light too, light really, but getting her out of the cramped upside-down cockpit while supporting her dead weight was like solving a puzzle made of angles and physics and desperation. "Come on, sweetheart," he murmured, maneuvering her shoulders through the door. "Work with me here. Almost there. Almost—" She moaned softly, her eyes fluttering but not opening. "That's it. Stay with me." With one final effort, Ethan pulled her free of the wreckage and carried her away from the car up the embankment. His boots slipped in the mud. He went down on one knee, caught himself, kept moving. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead. Every muscle burned. He'd made it maybe 20 feet when the car exploded. The blast hit like a physical force, a wave of heat and light that sent Ethan stumbling forward. He turned his body to shield the woman, hitting the ground hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. Debris rained down around them, metal fragments burning plastic glass. When the roaring stopped, Ethan lifted his head. The car was fully engulfed now, flames reaching up into the night sky despite the rain. Black smoke billowed in thick clouds. "Dad!" Noah was screaming from the truck. "Dad!" "I'm okay," Ethan called back. "Stay there." He looked down at the woman in his arms. Her eyes were open now, dark eyes filled with confusion and fear. She was shaking, going into shock. "You're okay," Ethan told her, his voice calmer than he felt. "You were in an accident, but you're safe now. Help is coming." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I can't. What happened?" "Car crash. Don't try to move. Just breathe." She stared at him like she was trying to understand a foreign language. Blood still ran down her face from the cut on her forehead. Ethan shrugged out of his jacket, his only jacket, the one he'd saved 3 months to buy, and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Stay with me," he said. "What's your name?" "Claire." The word came out slurred. "My name is Claire." "Okay, Claire. I'm Ethan. You're going to be fine." "Cold," she whispered. "I'm so cold." Ethan pulled her closer, sharing what little body heat he had, while the rain continued to fall and the car burned behind them. He could hear sirens in the distance. Now someone must have seen the explosion, called 911. "Help's coming," he said. "Just hang on." Her hand found his, gripped it with surprising strength. "Thank you," she breathed. "Thank you for—" "Don't thank me yet. Save your energy." But she was looking at him, with those dark eyes, really looking like she was memorizing his face. "You saved my life." She said each word clearly, an effort. "You saved—" Her eyes rolled back. She went limp in his arms. "Claire." Ethan's heart jumped. "Claire." He checked her pulse again. Still there, still beating. Just unconscious. He kept pressure on the wound at her forehead, kept talking to her even though she couldn't hear him, kept her warm with his body while the fire raged and the sirens grew louder. The ambulance arrived first, followed by 2 fire trucks and a sheriff's cruiser. Paramedics descended with practiced efficiency, taking Claire from Ethan's arms, strapping her to a backboard, starting an IV, while one of them rattled off medical jargon into a radio. "Sir." A paramedic, young guy, couldn't have been more than 25, was looking at Ethan with concern. "Are you injured? Let me check you out." "I'm fine," Ethan said. His hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "Just make sure she's okay." "We've got her, but you've got some burns on your arms and—" "I said I'm fine." A sheriff's deputy approached, notepad in hand. "I'm going to need a statement. Can you tell me what happened?" Ethan gave him the basics. The car swerving the crash, pulling her out before the explosion. The deputy wrote it all down, asked for Ethan's name and contact information. "You're a hero," the deputy said, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "That was incredibly brave. Incredibly stupid, but incredibly brave." Ethan shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," the deputy said. "They really wouldn't have." More vehicles arrived, news vans, he realized with sinking dread. Someone must have been monitoring police scanners. A reporter in a rain jacket was already setting up a cameraman in tow. "Mr. Miles," the reporter called out, approaching fast. "Mr. Miles, can we get a statement? How does it feel to be a hero tonight?" "I'm not—" Ethan started, but the camera was already rolling, a light shining in his face. "Dad." Noah had finally disobeyed orders and was running toward him through the rain. Ethan turned away from the camera and caught his son, pulled him close. "I told you to stay in the truck." "You were taking too long," Noah said into Ethan's chest. "I was scared." "I know, I'm sorry, but I'm okay. Everything's okay." Behind them, the paramedics were loading Claire into the ambulance. Ethan watched through the chaos of emergency lights and rain, saw them close the doors, saw the ambulance pull away with sirens wailing. The reporter was still trying to get his attention. More people were arriving, gawkers probably alerted by social media posts about the fire visible from the highway. "Come on," Ethan said to Noah. "Let's go home." "But shouldn't you?" "Now, Noah." They walked back to the truck, Ethan's arm around his son's shoulders. His hands were still shaking. His shirt was soaked through his jacket, gone, his arms stinging from minor burns he hadn't even felt during the rescue. "That was really scary," Noah said quietly as they reached the truck. "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "It was. But you saved her. You really saved her." Ethan didn't answer. He just started the engine, pulled back onto the highway, and drove home through the rain. While behind them, the wreckage continued to burn, and the camera crews captured footage that would be on the morning news. They didn't speak much during the rest of the drive. When they finally pulled into the gravel driveway of their small rental house, 2 bedrooms peeling paint, a porch that sagged on one side, Noah turned to his father. "Are you okay, Dad? Really?" Ethan looked at his son, at those worried eyes that had seen too much tonight. "Yeah, buddy. I'm really okay." "Good." Noah unbuckled his seatbelt. "Can I still have that cereal?" Despite everything, the crash, the fire, the fear still coursing through his veins, Ethan laughed. "Yeah, you can have your cereal." Inside the house was cold. Ethan turned up the heat they could barely afford while Noah poured himself a bowl of off-brand cornflakes. Ethan stood at the kitchen sink, finally washing the blood and soot from his hands, watching the water run red, then gray, then clear. His reflection stared back at him from the dark window above the sink. He looked tired. Older than his 32 years. His hair was still wet from the rain, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Dad." Noah was at the kitchen table, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Do you think she'll be okay? The lady you saved?" Ethan dried his hands on a dish towel. "I hope so. She was really pretty, even with the blood." "Noah." "She was. I saw her when they put her in the ambulance." Noah crunched his cereal thoughtfully. "I bet she's rich. That car looked really expensive before it exploded." "Money doesn't matter when you're hurt," Ethan said quietly. "I guess." Noah finished his cereal, carried the bowl to the sink. "Thanks for being brave tonight, Dad." "Thanks for staying in the truck." Ethan ruffled his son's hair. "Most of the time." Noah grinned, then yawned hugely. "I'm tired for real now. Bed, go. Brush your teeth, actually brush them." "I will." Ethan listened to Noah's footsteps on the stairs, heard the bathroom door close, the sound of running water. He walked to the living room and sank onto the threadbare couch, suddenly more exhausted than he could ever remember being. His phone buzzed. A text from his boss, Miller, saw the news. "You okay?" Ethan stared at the message. The news. Christ, he'd forgotten about the cameras. He typed back, "Fine. See you tomorrow." Tomorrow. Right. He still had to work tomorrow. Mrs. Henderson's Buick wasn't going to finish itself, and there were 2 other cars in the bay waiting for repairs. Life didn't stop just because you pulled someone from a burning wreck. Ethan closed his eyes and saw her face again. Claire. She'd said her name was Claire, looking up at him with those dark eyes, gripping his hand, whispering, "Thank you," like those 2 words contained everything. He wondered if she'd remember him when she woke up. Probably not. Head injuries did funny things to memory. And even if she did remember, what then? She'd go back to whatever fancy life she came from, driving expensive cars and wearing designer dresses to parties. And he'd go back to changing oil and replacing brake pads and trying to stretch his paycheck far enough to cover the electric bill and Noah's school supplies. Their lives had intersected for maybe 10 minutes on a rainy highway. That was all. Tomorrow she'd be a story he told Noah someday, and he'd be nothing to her, just a stranger's face, half remembered from the worst night of her life. That was fine. That was how it should be. Ethan Miles didn't save people for recognition. He did it because it was right, because someone needed help, and he could give it. That was enough. Upstairs, he could hear Noah moving around, getting ready for bed. In a minute, he'd go up, tuck him in, make sure the nightlight was on. Tomorrow, he'd wake up at 6, make breakfast. Drop Noah at school, spend 10 hours under the hood of someone's car, pick Noah up, help with homework, make dinner. Do it all over again. Simple. Predictable. Safe. The burns on his arms were starting to hurt. Now the adrenaline fully worn off. Ethan went to the bathroom, found the first aid kit, dabbed some antibiotic ointment on the worst of them. They weren't bad, he'd gotten lucky. A few seconds slower, and that explosion would have caught him full on. He thought about that, about how close he'd come, about Noah watching from the truck, about what would have happened if things had gone differently. His hands started shaking again. "Dad!" Ethan looked up. Noah stood in the bathroom doorway in his pajamas, the ones with the dinosaurs that were getting too small, but that Noah refused to give up. "Can't sleep?" Ethan asked. Noah shook his head. "Keep thinking about the fire." Ethan held out his arms, and Noah came to him, letting Ethan pull him close. "It's okay to be scared. It was scary." "Were you scared?" Ethan considered lying, but Noah deserved better. "Yeah, I was terrified. But you did it anyway." Sometimes being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to be like you when I grow up." And there it was, the thing that made every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt worth it. Ethan kissed the top of his son's head. "You're already better than me, buddy. Come on, let's get you to bed for real this time." He tucked Noah in, made sure the nightlight was glowing softly in the corner, sat on the edge of the bed like he did every night. "Dad?" Noah's voice was already drowsy. "Do you think we'll ever see her again, Claire?" "I don't know," Ethan said honestly. "Probably not. I hope she remembers you saved her. It doesn't matter if she does." "It matters to me." Noah mumbled, eyes already closing. "You're a hero." Ethan stayed until Noah's breathing deepened into sleep, then quietly left the room, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. He went to his own room, barely bigger than Noah's, with a bed and a dresser, and not much else, and sat on the edge of the mattress. Through the window, he could see the glow on the horizon, where the emergency crews were probably still working the crash site. Tomorrow, it would be in the papers, maybe on the local news. People would talk about it for a day or two, then forget. Life would go on. Ethan lay back on the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come, not yet. His mind kept replaying it all, the screech of tires, the sound of metal crunching, the weight of Claire in his arms, those dark eyes looking up at him with something like wonder. "Thank you," she'd whispered. "For what? For doing what anyone should do, for being in the right place at the wrong time." He turned on his side, closed his eyes, and tried to will himself to sleep. Tomorrow would come, whether he was ready or not. The garage. The bills. Noah's science project that was due Friday. All the pieces of his ordinary life waiting to be picked up and carried forward. The girl from the car crash would recover in some expensive hospital room, surrounded by family and flowers and everything money could buy. She'd heal, move on, probably never give him another thought. And that was okay. It had to be. But as Ethan finally drifted off to sleep in the early hours of morning, he couldn't quite shake the memory of her hand gripping his, or the way she'd looked at him like he was something more than just a mechanic with grease under his fingernails. Like he was someone who mattered. It was a nice feeling. It wouldn't last. But for one night on a rain-soaked highway with the world on fire behind them, Ethan Miles had been somebody's hero. And sometimes that's enough. The morning brought no mercy. Ethan's alarm screamed at 6 a.m., dragging him from dreams filled with fire and twisted metal. His arms ached where the burns had blistered overnight, and every muscle in his body protested as he swung his legs out of bed. He showered quickly. Hot water was expensive, and pulled on his work clothes, the navy blue shirt with Miller's Garage, embroidered over the pocket, and his name stitched underneath. The shirt that marked him as exactly what he was, a mechanic, nothing more. Downstairs, Noah was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of cereal and his eyes glued to the small TV on the counter. "Dad, you're on the news." Ethan froze. Sure enough, there he was on the screen, grainy footage from last night, rain-soaked and mud-covered, carrying Claire away from the burning wreck. The headline scrolling across the bottom read, Local mechanic saves heiress in dramatic highway rescue. Heiress. Ethan Miles, a mechanic from Millbrook, pulled 23-year-old Claire Donovan from her vehicle moments before it exploded, the news anchor said, in that practiced dramatic tone they all used. Ms. Donovan, daughter of tech mogul Richard Donovan, is currently in stable condition at Mercy General Hospital. Her family released a statement thanking the brave man who saved their daughter's life. The screen cut to a photo of Claire, a professional headshot, probably from some society event. She was smiling, wearing pearls, and a dress that probably cost more than Ethan's truck. She looked like she belonged in a magazine, not bleeding in a ditch on Route 17. "Turn it off," Ethan said quietly. "But Dad..." "Noah, off." Noah clicked the remote, and the silence felt heavy. He looked at his father with those two perceptive eyes. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Finish your breakfast. We're leaving in 10 minutes." The drive to Noah's school was quiet. Other parents stared as Ethan pulled up to the drop-off zone. Word traveled fast in a small town. By lunchtime, everyone in Millbrook would know what he'd done. By dinner, they'd be sick of hearing about it. "Dad..." Noah unbuckled his seatbelt but didn't get out. "People are going to ask me about it today." "I know. What should I say?" Ethan looked at his son. "Tell them the truth. I helped someone who needed help. That's all." "That's not all, though. You're a hero." "Noah?" Ethan sighed. "I'm just a guy who did what needed doing. Now go on, you're going to be late." Noah grabbed his backpack, but paused at the door. "I'm proud of you anyway." Before Ethan could respond, Noah was gone, running toward the school entrance where his friends were already gathering, probably bursting with questions. Miller's garage sat on the edge of town, a squat cinder-block building with 2 bays and a parking lot full of cars waiting for repair. Miller himself was already there when Ethan arrived, standing by the front desk with a newspaper in his hand. "There's my celebrity employee," Miller said, grinning. He was 63, built like a barrel with hands that had seen 50 years of engine work. "Front page Ethan. Front page." Ethan glanced at the paper. Sure enough, there was a photo of him from last night, the same one from the TV news. The headline read, "Guardian Angel on Route 17. "Can we not do this?" Ethan asked, heading toward the first bay where Mrs. Henderson's Buick waited. "Do what? Acknowledge that you saved a girl's life, that you're all over the news, that the phone's been ringing off the hook since we opened." Ethan stopped. "What?" "Reporters," Miller said. 3 different news stations. The Gazette wants an interview. Some podcast called asking if you'd come on their show." He paused. "And someone from the Donovan family left a number, said they want to thank you personally." Ethan's stomach tightened. "I don't want to talk to any of them." "Ethan..." "I mean it, Miller. No interviews, no phone calls. I just want to work." Miller studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll tell them you're not interested. But son, what you did took guts. You should be proud." "I'm just trying to pay my bills," Ethan muttered and disappeared under the Buick's hood. The work was good. The work didn't ask questions or take photos or call him a hero. The work was honest, broken things that needed fixing, problems with clear solutions. By noon, Ethan had finished the Buick and moved on to a transmission replacement on a Honda Civic. He was elbow deep in the engine when he heard Miller's voice from the office. "I'm sorry, miss, but he doesn't want to wait. You can't just..." Footsteps echoed across the concrete floor. Ethan didn't look up, didn't stop working. Probably another reporter who'd ignored Miller's refusal. "Ethan Miles." The voice was soft-cultured, uncertain, not a reporter's voice. Ethan straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, and turned around. Claire Donovan stood in his garage. She looked different than she had last night, cleaner, obviously wearing jeans and a simple sweater instead of that torn designer dress. A white bandage covered the cut on her forehead. Her left arm was in a sling. But those eyes were the same, dark, intense, looking at him like she was trying to solve an equation. "You shouldn't have come," Ethan said softly. "I had to." She took a step closer, and he noticed she was limping slightly. They said you wouldn't take calls, that you refused interviews. I needed to see you to thank you in person. You just did. You can go now. Her eyes widened slightly, hurt flickering across her face. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude. You saved my life. I couldn't just not acknowledge that. Ethan set down the wrench he'd been holding. Behind him, he could sense Miller hovering in the doorway, watching this exchange like it was a tennis match. Look, Ethan said, keeping his voice level. I'm glad you're okay, really. But I didn't do it for recognition or thanks or whatever else you think you owe me. You were in trouble, I helped. That's all there is to it. That's not all there is to it, Claire said, and there was steel in her voice now beneath the softness. You risked your life. You pulled me from a burning car. You stayed with me in the rain while I bled. That's not nothing. It's what anyone would have done. No. She shook her head firmly. It's what you did, and I won't diminish that just because you're uncomfortable with gratitude. They stared at each other across the oil-stained concrete. Ethan noticed things he hadn't noticed last night, the elegant way she held herself despite the injuries, the intelligence in her eyes, the set of her jaw that said she was used to getting her way. Why were you driving so fast? The question came out harsher than he'd intended. In the rain on a road you clearly didn't know. Claire flinched. I was upset, angry. I'd just walked out of a party where my father spent 2 hours parading me in front of potential business partners like I was part of his portfolio. Her voice cracked slightly. I wasn't paying attention. I took the curve too fast and lost control. You could have killed yourself. I know. She looked down at her hands. Believe me, I know. I've thought about nothing else since I woke up in the hospital. The doctors said if you'd been even 30 seconds slower. She didn't finish the sentence. Ethan picked up his wrench again, turned back to the Honda. Well, you're okay. That's what matters. You should get back to the hospital. Make sure they're monitoring that concussion properly. I was discharged this morning. Claire moved closer, peering around him at the engine. What are you working on? Transmission replacement. Is it difficult? Depends on your definition of difficult. Ethan glanced at her. Why are you still here? Because... Claire hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Because I saw your hands last night. Grease-stained, calloused, competent. My father has employees who've never worked a real day in their lives who couldn't change a tire if their Mercedes depended on it. But you knew exactly what to do. How to get me out, how to keep me safe. That kind of knowledge, that competence, it's rare. It's a job, Ethan said. Nothing special about it. Claire's gaze drifted to the far wall of the garage, and Ethan's stomach sank as he realized what she was looking at. The sketches. The ones he'd pinned up months ago and forgotten about, too busy with actual work to pay attention to dreams. She walked over to them, and Ethan wanted to stop her, but couldn't find the words. There were maybe a dozen sketches. Total technical drawings of engine modifications, safety systems, a revolutionary braking mechanism he'd designed late one night when Noah was asleep and the house was quiet. They were detailed, precise, the work of someone who understood engineering on a fundamental level. Claire studied them in silence. When she finally turned back to him, her expression had changed completely. Who drew these? She asked quietly. Nobody. Just... doodling. Ethan. She looked at him directly. These aren't doodles. This braking system, do you understand what you've designed here? This could prevent accidents, save lives. It's just an idea. It's brilliant. She pulled one of the sketches down, holding it carefully. This modification to the hydraulic system, the fail-safe redundancy. Have you shown these to anyone, submitted them to any companies? Ethan laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yeah, I'm sure automotive companies are lining up to hear ideas from a small-town mechanic. That's definitely how the world works. It could be, if you had the right connections, the right backing. I don't want backing, Ethan said sharply. I want to finish this transmission, pick up my kid from school and make dinner. That's my life. Those sketches are they're just something I do when I can't sleep." Claire carefully pinned the sketch back on the wall. "You could change lives with these," she said softly, almost to herself. "You could revolutionize vehicle safety." "Hard to change lives when you're just trying to pay rent." The words hung in the air between them. Claire turned, and Ethan saw something in her eyes, understanding maybe, or pity. He wasn't sure which was worse. "I should go," she said finally. "I'm sorry for intruding on your work." "You didn't—" Ethan stopped, frustrated with himself. "Look, I'm glad you're okay, really. I hope you heal up well and that's it. That's all I've got." Claire nodded slowly. She pulled a business card from her pocket and set it on the workbench. "If you ever change your mind about the sketches, about anything, my direct number is on there." Ethan looked at the card but didn't touch it. Thick, cardstock, embossed lettering. Claire Donovan, Director of Innovation, Donovan Industries. "I won't change my mind," he said. "Okay." She smiled small and sad. "Thank you again, Ethan Miles, for everything." She walked toward the door, limping slightly, and Ethan forced himself not to watch her go. He turned back to the Honda, picked up his wrench, tried to focus on the work. "Ethan," Miller's voice from the office doorway. "You're an idiot." "Shut up, Miller. That girl just offered you an opportunity most people would kill for." "I don't need opportunities. I need a steady paycheck." "Those sketches of yours are fantasies," Ethan interrupted. "They're what I do to pretend my life could have been different. But it's not different. This is what I am. This is what I do." Miller was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah really did a number on you, didn't she?" Ethan's hands tightened on the wrench. "Don't. Someone believes in you, sees something in you, and you can't even accept a simple thank you without shutting down." "I said don't." "Fine." Miller retreated into the office. "But that card's staying on your workbench. What you do with it is your business." Ethan worked through lunch through the afternoon until his hands were numb and his back screamed, and he couldn't think about anything except the next bolt, the next wire, the next repair. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop seeing Claire's face when she looked at his sketches. The wonder in her eyes. The excitement. Like she'd found something valuable in a place she hadn't expected to look. At 3:30, he left to pick up Noah. The school parking lot was worse than the morning, parents openly staring, a few coming up to congratulate him. Ethan nodded politely, said thank you, tried to escape as quickly as possible. Noah was buzzing with energy when he got in the truck. "Everyone wanted to know about last night. Mrs. Peterson made me tell the whole class what happened, and Tommy's dad said you should run for mayor." Noah paused for breath. "Also, I told everyone about your sketches, the ones on the garage wall." Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Why would you do that?" "Because they're cool. And Mr. Harrison, you know, my science teacher, he said if you ever wanted to come talk to our class about engineering, you could." "Noah, those sketches are just what?" Noah looked at him with those earnest 8-year-old eyes. "Just awesome ideas that could help people." "Yeah, Dad. I know." They drove home in silence. Ethan made spaghetti for dinner, the cheap kind from a box, and listened to Noah chatter about his day, while his mind wandered to places he'd locked away years ago. After Noah went to bed, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with a beer he couldn't really afford and Claire's business card in front of him. He thought about the sketches, about the late nights spent drafting them, calculating angles and stress points and failure modes, about the dreams he'd had once before life got in the way. He thought about Claire in the hospital, waking up and deciding her first priority was finding him, tracking him down despite his refusal to talk, looking at his work like it mattered, looking at him like he mattered. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I know you said you don't want thanks, but I wanted you to know I haven't stopped thinking about your designs. They're remarkable. If you ever want to discuss them, my offer stands. Claire Ethan stared at the message for a long time. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, typing and deleting responses he didn't send. Finally, he set the phone down and picked up Claire's business card. Tomorrow, he'd throw it away. Tomorrow, he'd go back to his normal life. His safe life, where he fixed other people's engines and kept his head down and didn't dare to hope for anything more. But tonight, just for tonight, he allowed himself to wonder, what if she was right? What if those sketches could matter? What if he could be more than just a mechanic trying to make ends meet? What if for once in his life he let someone believe in him? The questions followed him to sleep unanswered but persistent, like the memory of dark eyes looking at him with something that felt dangerously close to hope. 3 days passed, then 4. Ethan threw himself into work trying to forget the conversation in the garage. But Claire's card remained on his workbench, unmoved, impossible to ignore. On the 5th day, Miller found him staring at it during lunch. "You gonna call her or frame it?" Miller asked. "Neither." "Ethan?" "Drop it, Miller. Please." But that night after Noah was asleep, Ethan pulled out his old engineering textbooks from college, the ones he'd kept despite Sarah's insistence they were taking up space. He sat at the kitchen table and started refining one of his sketches, improving the design, fixing the flaws only he could see. He told himself it meant nothing. Just killing time. Just scratching an itch. But when he finally went to bed at 2 a.m., his fingers were covered in pencil graphite, and his mind was racing with possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years. The next morning, Claire's card was still on his workbench, and Ethan still hadn't thrown it away. 2 weeks crawled by like months. The card stayed on the workbench, gathering a fine layer of dust and oil mist. Ethan looked at it every day and told himself tomorrow would be the day he'd toss it in the trash. Tomorrow never came. The sketches multiplied. Late nights after Noah fell asleep, Ethan found himself at the kitchen table with mechanical pencils and graph paper, refining designs that had lived in his head for years. The braking system evolved into something better, cleaner, more efficient. He couldn't help himself once he started. The engineering problems pulled him in like gravity. Miller noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "You sleeping at all?" he asked one morning, watching Ethan fumble with a socket wrench. "Enough. You're a terrible liar." Miller crossed his arms. "What's got you up at night?" Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't explain how it felt to dust off dreams he'd buried, to remember who he'd been before life taught him to aim lower. The sketches were dangerous. They reminded him of possibilities of a version of himself he'd given up on. On a Tuesday afternoon, while Ethan was replacing spark plugs on a beat-up Chevy, his phone rang. Unknown number. He ignored it. It rang again 5 minutes later, then again. The 4th time, Miller picked it up from the workbench. "Miller's garage," he said. Then his eyebrows shot up. "Oh, yes, he's right here." He held out the phone to Ethan. "It's for you." Ethan wiped his hands and took it reluctantly. "Hello." "Ethan, it's Claire." His stomach did something complicated. "How did you get this number?" "You're listed in the employee directory on Miller's website." A pause. "You haven't called." "Didn't see a reason to." "I gave you several reasons." Her voice was gentle but firm. "Those designs of yours, I haven't been able to stop thinking about them. I showed the photos I took to our head engineer. He wants to meet you." Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. "You had no right to do that." "I had every right. You saved my life. That gives me the right to return the favor." She took a breath. "Look, I'm not trying to push, but there's a dinner at my family's estate this Saturday. Engineers, innovators, people who could help you turn those sketches into reality. Come, meet them, see what's possible." "I can't just..." "Why not? What's stopping you?" "Because I don't belong in that world." Ethan wanted to say, because I'm a mechanic with a high school diploma and grease under my nails. Because people like me don't sit at tables with people like you. I have my son to think about, he said instead. Bring him. No hesitation. There's plenty of space, and honestly, it would be good for my father to remember that real people exist outside his boardroom. Please, Ethan, just one dinner. If you hate it, you never have to speak to me again. Ethan closed his eyes. Every rational part of his brain screamed no. This was a mistake. He'd show up in his only suit 10 years old and tight in the shoulders, and they'd all see exactly what he was: nobody. Claire's charity case. The poor mechanic she felt obligated to help. But underneath the fear was something else. Something that sounded suspiciously like hope. What time? He heard himself ask. 7 o'clock Saturday. I'll text you the address. He could hear the smile in her voice. Thank you, Ethan. This means more than you know. After she hung up, Ethan stood there with the phone in his hand, wondering what he'd just agreed to. Miller was grinning. You said yes. Shut up. You actually said yes. I'm proud of you, son. I'm an idiot, Ethan muttered, but he was already mentally inventorying his closet, trying to remember if he owned a tie. That night, he told Noah about the dinner over microwave chicken nuggets. We're going to a mansion. Noah's eyes went wide. Like a real mansion with stairs and everything. I think most houses have stairs, bud. You know what I mean? A fancy mansion. Can I wear my suit from Uncle Mike's wedding? Ethan winced. That was 2 years ago. Does it still fit? They went upstairs to check. The pants were 3 inches too short. Well, Noah said, looking down at his exposed ankles. This is a problem. Yeah. Ethan sat on Noah's bed, suddenly exhausted. Maybe this whole thing is a mistake. We don't have to go. Are you kidding? Noah spun around. Dad, a millionaire invited us to dinner, and she thinks your drawings are awesome. We're definitely going. They're not drawings, they're technical schematics, and... Ethan stopped. When did you get so confident? I learned from you. Noah grinned. You run into burning cars, remember? This is just dinner. Just dinner. Right. On Thursday, Ethan did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He went to the department store in the next town over and bought Noah a new suit. Navy blue, nothing fancy, but it fit properly. While he was there, he grabbed a new shirt for himself. White, crisp, professional. It felt like armor. Saturday arrived too quickly. Ethan spent the morning pacing the afternoon second-guessing, and by 6 o'clock he was ready to call the whole thing off. Dad, you're sweating through your shirt, Noah observed from the couch. I'm aware. Ethan checked his reflection in the hallway mirror for the 10th time. The suit still didn't fit right in the shoulders. His tie was crooked. He looked exactly like what he was, a working man playing dress-up. You look good, Noah said loyally. I look like I'm going to a funeral. Claire likes you. She wouldn't have invited us if she didn't want us there. Ethan turned to his son, 8 years old and somehow wiser than him. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't listen. Noah stood up, adjusting his new tie. Come on, we're going to be late. The drive to the Donovan estate took 40 minutes, leading them away from Millbrook's familiar streets into countryside Ethan had only seen from the highway. The houses grew larger, the properties more sprawling, until they reached a gated entrance with an actual guardhouse. Ethan rolled down his window. The guard, in a uniform nicer than Ethan's suit, checked a clipboard. Name? Ethan Miles. We're here for dinner. The guard nodded, pressing a button. The gates swung open with silent efficiency. Follow the drive to the main house. Someone will meet you. The driveway was longer than Ethan's street. Trees lined both sides, perfectly manicured, leading to a house that made Noah gasp audibly. It wasn't just a house. It was an estate, 3 stories of stone and glass, with wings spreading out like arms lit from below by landscaping lights that made it glow against the darkening sky. The fountain in the circular drive was bigger than Ethan's living room. "Holy crap," Noah whispered. "Language." "But Dad, look at it." Ethan parked his truck next to a Mercedes and a Tesla, feeling acutely aware of the rust spots on his fender and the crack in his windshield he'd been meaning to fix for 6 months. Before they could get out, the front door opened and Claire appeared descending the steps with a smile that made Ethan's breath catch. She wore a simple dress, emerald green, elegant without being showy, and the bandage was gone from her forehead, leaving just a small scar at her hairline. She looked healthy, vibrant, nothing like the broken girl he'd pulled from the wreck. "You came," she said, reaching them. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I," Ethan admitted. Claire's attention shifted to Noah. "And you must be Noah. Your dad's told me about you." "He has." Noah looked up at Ethan with surprise. "I mentioned you once," Ethan muttered. "Maybe twice." "He said you're brilliant at science," Claire said, crouching to Noah's eye level. "That you want to be an engineer someday." Noah's face lit up. "Did he really say that?" "Come on." Claire straightened, gesturing toward the house. "Everyone's eager to meet you both." The interior was even more intimidating than the exterior. Marble floors artwork that probably cost more than Ethan's annual salary, a staircase that curved upward like something from a movie. Voices and laughter drifted from somewhere deeper in the house. Claire led them through a hallway lined with family portraits, generations of Donovans staring down with varying degrees of disapproval, and into a formal dining room where a dozen people mingled with champagne glasses. The conversation stopped when they entered. Ethan felt every eye in the room assess him, measure him, and find him wanting. He recognized the look he'd seen it before from Sarah's friends, from the parents at Noah's school, who drove cars he serviced, but never spoke to him beyond what was necessary. "Everyone," Claire said, her hand light on Ethan's elbow. "This is Ethan Miles and his son Noah." A murmur of polite acknowledgement. A few genuine smiles. And then a man separated from the group, tall and silver-haired with eyes that reminded Ethan of a shark, cold, calculating, always measuring. "So, this is our guardian angel," the man said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of being obeyed. "Richard Donovan, Claire's father." He extended his hand. Ethan shook it, noting the firm grip designed to intimidate. "Mr. Donovan, thank you for having us." "Well, when my daughter insists, one learns to accommodate." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Claire tells me you're a mechanic." "Yes, sir." "How honest. We don't get many mechanics at our dinner parties." He turned to Claire. "Darling, why don't you introduce our guest to the others while I have a word with the kitchen?" It was a dismissal polite, but unmistakable. As Richard walked away, Ethan caught the look Claire shot at her father's back, frustration mixed with embarrassment. The next 30 minutes were torture. Claire introduced them around engineers from Donovan Industries, a professor from MIT, a woman who'd started her own tech company. They were all polite, asking questions about the rescue, with the kind of morbid curiosity people had for disasters they weren't part of. But Ethan could see the calculation behind their smiles. He was a curiosity, nothing more. Claire's good deed. Only Noah seemed oblivious, excitedly asking the MIT professor about thermodynamics, until the man actually laughed and started explaining concepts most third graders wouldn't understand. Dinner was announced. They moved to a table that could have seated 20, set with china so delicate Ethan was afraid to touch it. He was placed next to Claire with Noah on his other side, while Richard presided at the head of the table like a king holding court. The first course arrived, something that might have been soup but looked like art. Ethan watched which spoon everyone else used before touching his own. "So, Miles," Richard said from the head of the table, his voice cutting through the smaller conversations. "Claire speaks highly of these designs of yours. Engineering concepts, she says." Every head turned toward Ethan. "They're just sketches," Ethan said. "Nothing formal. Sketches that apparently impressed my daughter enough to warrant this invitation." Richard's tone made it clear what he thought of that judgment. Tell us about them. It was a test. Ethan recognized it immediately, the same tone his high school physics teacher had used when calling on students he thought weren't paying attention. Put up or shut up. The main one is a hydraulic braking system, Ethan said carefully. It incorporates a fail-safe redundancy that would prevent total brake failure even if the primary system is compromised. Sounds expensive, one of the engineers said. It would be, Ethan acknowledged, but the cost per unit would drop significantly with scale. And you can't put a price on safety. You absolutely can, Richard said. Everything has a price. That's basic economics. Not human lives, Ethan said before he could stop himself. The table went quiet. Richard's eyes sharpened with interest. An idealist. How refreshing. He sipped his wine. But surely you understand that automotive companies operate on margins. Adding expensive safety features that aren't legally required would put them at a competitive disadvantage. Until those features become the standard, Claire interjected. Until companies realize that saving lives is good business. Spoken like someone who's never run a business, Richard said, not unkindly. Sentiment doesn't balance budgets, sweetheart. Ethan felt Claire stiffen beside him. Across the table, Noah was watching with worried eyes, sensing the tension, even if he didn't fully understand it. The second course arrived. Ethan moved food around his plate, his appetite gone. The conversation shifted to industry gossip, merger talks, stock prices, a language he didn't speak. He felt himself shrinking, becoming smaller with each passing minute. "Dad," Noah whispered, tugging his sleeve. "Can we leave?" Before Ethan could answer, Richard's voice boomed again. "Claire mentioned you never attended university, Mr. Miles. Self-taught, is that right?" "I had 2 years of community college," Ethan said evenly. "Then I had a son to raise." "Admirable. Family first, certainly." Richard's smile was thin. "But you must understand why I'm skeptical of engineering advice from someone without formal credentials. No offense intended." "None taken," Ethan lied. "Father," Claire started, but Richard held up a hand. "I'm merely being practical, darling. Gratitude is one thing, and we are grateful, Mr. Miles, for saving Claire's life. Truly. But charity has limits. We can't fund every amateur inventor with an idea. The world doesn't work that way." The words hit like physical blows. Amateur. Charity. Every insecurity Ethan had ever felt about his place in the world crystallized in that moment. He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Ethan," Claire said softly. "Please." "Thank you for dinner, Mr. Donovan," Ethan said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "But I think we should go." "Dad," Noah whispered urgently. "Surely you're not leaving because of a little honest conversation," Richard said, leaning back in his chair. "I thought mechanics had thicker skin." "We do," Ethan said. "Thick enough to know when we're not wanted." He started to turn, humiliation burning in his chest like acid, but Claire stood abruptly, her hand catching his arm. "Wait, please." Her voice was trembling. "Father, you're being cruel." "I'm being realistic." "You're being a snob." Claire's eyes flashed. "Ethan risked his life for me. He pulled me from a burning car while you were 40 miles away at a board meeting, completely unaware your daughter was dying. And now you mock him, dismiss him, because he doesn't have the right degree, because he works with his hands." "Claire, I don't want to give him charity," she said, her voice rising. "I want to give him a chance. There's a difference." Richard laughed, sharp and dismissive. "A chance at what? To play engineer, to waste company resources on fantasy projects?" Something in Ethan snapped. The anger that had been building at Richard's condescension, at his own inadequacy, at the unfairness of a world that judged him by his job title instead of his ideas, crystallized into cold clarity. "It's not fantasy," he said quietly. Richard raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." Ethan turned back to the table. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "Your braking system on the Model 7 sedan. The one you launched last year. It's good, but it's not great. The hydraulic pressure distribution is uneven under heavy braking, which causes the slight pull to the left that Consumer Reports mentioned in their review. The room had gone completely silent. Even the servants had stopped moving. Richard's expression hardened. And you would know this how? Because I've worked on 3 of them this month alone, all with the same complaint. Pulls left under hard braking. Ethan pulled out his phone, found the photos he'd taken of the last one, slid it across the table to Richard. The problem is in the proportioning valve. Your engineers optimized for cost, not performance. But if you modified the valve geometry... He grabbed a napkin and pulled a pen from his pocket, sketching quickly, and redistributed the pressure curve like this. You'd eliminate the pull and actually improve overall stopping distance by about 8%. He slid the napkin to Richard. The older man stared at it, his expression unreadable. One of the engineers leaned over to look. His eyes widened. Actually, that might work. It would work, Ethan said. And it would cost maybe $15 more per unit to manufacture. Richard studied the napkin for a long moment. When he looked up at Ethan, something had shifted in his eyes. Not warmth exactly, but reassessment. You figured this out from fixing cars, he said slowly. I figured it out from understanding how things work. Ethan met his gaze steadily. A degree tells you the theory. Experience teaches you reality. I may not have gone to MIT, but I've spent 15 years with my hands inside engines learning what breaks and why. That's worth something. Richard sat back in his chair. The room waited. It's worth something, he conceded finally. But not a partnership, not a seat at this table. He gestured around the room. You've demonstrated competence, Mr. Miles, perhaps even talent. But that doesn't erase the gap between your world and ours. I know that, Ethan said. The anger was draining away now, leaving only exhaustion. I've always known that. That's why I should never have come here. He looked at Claire, saw the tears in her eyes, the apology written on her face. Some of us fix engines because we have to, he said softly. Not because someone lets us. He held out his hand to Noah. Come on, bud. Let's go home. Noah took his father's hand without a word. They walked through the dining room, past the portraits of wealthy Donovans who'd never worked a day in their lives, past the marble and the art and all the trappings of a world Ethan would never belong to. Claire caught up with them at the front door. Ethan, wait. Please. I'm so sorry. My father. Your father is right, Ethan interrupted gently. This was a nice idea, but it was never going to work. People like me don't sit at tables like that. We fix the cars those people drive. That's how it's always been. It doesn't have to be. Yeah, Ethan said. It does. He walked to his truck with Noah, helped his son into the passenger seat, and drove down that perfect driveway for the last time. In the rearview mirror, he could see Claire standing on the steps, silhouetted against the light from inside, growing smaller until she disappeared completely. Neither of them spoke on the drive home. Noah stared out the window while Ethan gripped the steering wheel and tried not to think about the napkin sketch he'd left behind, the moment of respect in Richard Donovan's eyes, before the walls came back up, the tears on Claire's face. When they pulled into their driveway, the house with peeling paint and a sagging porch, Noah finally broke the silence. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. Ethan looked at his son in surprise. For what? For embarrassing myself. For standing up to that mean man. For showing them you're smart. Noah unbuckled his seatbelt, even if they didn't deserve it. They went inside. Ethan sent Noah to change out of his suit while he stood in the kitchen, still wearing his tie, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed. A text from Claire. I'm sorry, you were brilliant tonight. Please don't give up. Ethan deleted it without responding. That night he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every word. The way Richard had laughed. The way the other guests had looked at him with polite pity. The way he'd felt standing in that dining room explaining concepts to people who would never see him as anything more than the help. But underneath the humiliation was something else. Something small but persistent. For 5 minutes tonight, Richard Donovan had listened to him, had looked at his sketch with genuine interest, had seen past the grease-stained hands to the mind behind them. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But for 5 minutes, Ethan Miles had been more than just a mechanic, and now he couldn't forget what that felt like. The days that followed felt like walking through fog. Ethan went through the motions. Wake up, make breakfast drop. Noah at school work, pick up Noah. Dinner, homework, bed. Repeat. The routine was safe, familiar, numbing. He didn't think about the dinner. Didn't think about Claire's texts, which came daily for a week before stopping completely. Didn't think about the napkin sketch he'd drawn, or the brief flash of respect in Richard Donovan's eyes. He especially didn't think about the sketches still pinned to his garage wall. Miller noticed, of course. The old man had worked with Ethan long enough to read his moods like weather patterns. "You're punishing yourself," Miller said one afternoon, watching Ethan attack a carburetor with unnecessary force. "I'm working." "You're hiding." Miller leaned against the workbench. "That girl's been calling the shop. I've been telling her you're busy like you asked. But Ethan, drop it. She cares about you." The wrench slipped, skinning Ethan's knuckles. He swore, grabbed a rag, pressed it against the bleeding. She felt guilty. There's a difference. "I don't think—" "I said drop it." Miller raised his hands in surrender and walked away, shaking his head. 3 weeks after the disastrous dinner on a gray October morning that threatened rain, Ethan was halfway through an oil change when the explosion happened. The sound rolled across town like thunder, a deep concussive boom that rattled the garage windows and sent tools clattering to the floor. Ethan straightened so fast, he cracked his head on the car's undercarriage. "What the hell was that?" Miller appeared from the office, face pale. Before Ethan could answer, sirens started wailing. Not one or two, a cascade of them, fire trucks and ambulances screaming through town from every direction. Ethan's phone lit up with emergency alerts. Factory explosion. Riverside Industrial Complex. Multiple casualties. Avoid the area. "Jesus," Miller breathed. "That's the old textile factory. They've been converting it to a tech hub." Something cold settled in Ethan's stomach. The Riverside complex was only 2 miles away, close enough that a bad explosion could mean people are trapped, he said, already moving toward his truck. "Ethan, the alert says to avoid. There are 200 workers in that building." Ethan grabbed his keys. "I'm going. Then I'm coming with you." They drove toward the smoke column, rising against the gray sky following the sirens. The closer they got, the worse it looked. Black smoke billowed from the eastern wing of the complex, and even from a quarter-mile away, Ethan could see flames licking through shattered windows. The police had set up barricades, keeping civilians back. Ethan parked and got out, pushing through the gathering crowd. Fire trucks surrounded the building, hoses pumping water that seemed to do nothing against the inferno. Paramedics worked on victims being carried out, burned, bleeding, in shock. "Sir, you need to stay back," a young cop said, stepping in front of Ethan. "How many are still inside?" "Sir, how many?" The cop's face was grim. "We don't know. The explosion happened in the mechanical room, trapped workers in the west wing. Firefighters are trying to reach them, but the smoke." Another explosion, smaller but sharp, sent flames shooting through a second-floor window. Someone in the crowd screamed. Ethan scanned the chaos, fire crews coordinating ambulances, loading victims, a news van setting up across the street. And there, near one of the ambulances, directing people with a clipboard and a determined expression, was Claire. She wore jeans and a volunteer vest, her hair pulled back, soot smudging her cheek. She was talking rapidly to a paramedic, pointing toward the building, organizing something. "Claire!" Ethan shouted over the noise. She turned, and her eyes went wide. "Ethan, what are you—" She ran over, dodging emergency personnel. "You shouldn't be here." "What are you doing here?" "I volunteer with the safety initiative. We've been working with this facility on emergency protocols. Her voice cracked. We were supposed to prevent this. How many trapped? At least 15 in the West Wing. The stairs collapsed. Fire crews can't reach them from inside. She looked at the building with helpless fury. We're trying to get a ladder high enough, but the heat... The West Wing has an exterior maintenance ladder, Ethan said. Fire escape on the north side leads to the second floor. Claire stared at him. How do you know that? I did repair work here 6 months ago. HVAC system. He was already moving, calculating angles and access points. If the interior stairs are gone, that ladder's the only way up. Ethan, the fire department is stretched too thin. He could see it, only 3 crews on scene for a building this size, and they were focused on the main blaze. The West Wing was being triaged, deemed less critical. Those people don't have time to wait. He started toward the north side of the building, staying low, using vehicles for cover. Behind him, he heard Claire shouting his name, heard Miller yelling at him to stop, but his focus had narrowed to a single point. The ladder, the people trapped, the problem that needed solving. The north side was less chaotic, the fire not yet spreading to this section. The maintenance ladder was still intact, a metal skeleton bolted to the brick, leading up 3 stories. Smoke poured from a second-floor window 20 feet to the left. Ethan grabbed the first rung and started climbing. The heat hit him halfway up, radiating from the brick like an oven. Sweat soaked through his shirt within seconds. Below, someone was shouting. Claire, maybe, or Miller. But Ethan couldn't hear the words over the roar of flames and his own hammering heart. He reached the second floor. The window was broken smoke, billowing out in thick clouds. Ethan pulled his shirt up over his nose and mouth, inadequate protection, but better than nothing, and climbed through. The interior was hell. Smoke choked the air so thick Ethan could barely see 3 feet ahead. Heat pressed down from above, and somewhere in the distance he could hear the groan of stressed metal, the crack of burning wood. And underneath it all, voices. People calling for help. "Hello?" Ethan shouted. "Can anyone hear me?" "Here!" A man's voice, rough with smoke. "We're here. In the assembly room." Ethan followed the voice, one hand on the wall, moving through smoke that burned his eyes and throat. He found them huddled in what had been a large open workspace. 12 people, maybe 15, clustered against the far wall, away from the flames that were creeping closer. Some were injured, one woman bleeding from a head wound. An older man was passed out on the floor. The stairs collapsed. A young guy in a factory uniform gasped out. "We couldn't get out. The smoke." "I know a way," Ethan said. "But we have to move fast. Can he walk?" He pointed at the unconscious man. "I don't think so." "Then I'll carry him. Everyone else, single file, stay low. Follow me exactly. Don't stop moving no matter what you hear. Understand?" They nodded, terror and hope warring on their soot-blackened faces. Ethan hauled the unconscious man over his shoulder, dead weight, heavy but manageable, and led them back through the smoke. The building groaned around them, and Ethan knew they were running out of time. The fire was spreading faster than he'd calculated. They reached the broken window. The ladder waited outside, metal gleaming through the smoke. "One at a time," Ethan commanded. "Slow and steady. Don't look down." He helped them through, the young guy first, then an older woman who was shaking so badly she could barely stand. One by one they climbed down, while Ethan held the unconscious man and watched the flames creep closer across the ceiling. 10 people out, 11, 12. The woman with the head wound went next, moving slowly, carefully. Ethan counted seconds, forcing himself to wait, to not rush her. Finally, she was down. 13 people out. 2 left, plus him. "You go," Ethan said to the last man, young, maybe 20. "What about him?" The kid pointed at the unconscious man. "I'll get him. Go." The kid hesitated, then climbed through the window. As soon as he was clear, Ethan shifted the unconscious man's weight, positioned him carefully, and started maneuvering him through the window. It was awkward, dangerous. The man's legs catching on broken glass, his weight pulling Ethan off balance. Behind them, something in the building gave way with a sound, like a cannon shot. The floor tilted. Ethan didn't think. He shoved the unconscious man through the window, grabbed the ladder with one hand, and climbed out just as the floor where he'd been standing collapsed into flames. Getting down the ladder with the man was the hardest thing Ethan had ever done. His shoulders screamed, his hands slipped on the hot metal, his legs shook with exhaustion. Below, people were shouting, but he couldn't spare the attention to listen. One rung. Another. Focus on the next handhold, the next step. Halfway down, his foot slipped. He caught himself, barely, the unconscious man nearly sliding off his shoulder. Someone below screamed. Ethan adjusted his grip, found his footing, kept moving. When his feet finally hit solid ground, hands grabbed the unconscious man, pulled him away. Paramedics swarmed. Someone wrapped a blanket around Ethan's shoulders. Someone else tried to put an oxygen mask on his face. "I'm fine," Ethan gasped, pushing it away. "Check them. Check the others." "Sir, you need to—" "I said I'm fine." His legs gave out. He sat down hard on the asphalt, suddenly aware of how badly his hands were burned, how his lungs felt like they were full of glass, how close he'd come to dying in that building. "Ethan!" Claire was there, dropping to her knees beside him, her hands on his face. She was crying, he realized with distant surprise. "You idiot!" she sobbed. "You complete idiot! You could have died. You could have—" "They're okay," he interrupted, his voice barely a rasp. "The people. They got out. I don't care about—" She stopped, took a shaking breath. "No, I do care. I'm glad they're safe. But Ethan, you can't. Why would you risk your life like that?" He looked at her through eyes that stung from smoke and exhaustion. "Because someone reminded me I could make a difference." The words hung between them, and Claire's tears fell harder. She pressed her forehead against his, her hands still cradling his face. "You're going to the hospital," she said firmly. "Don't argue with me." "Wasn't planning to." His vision was starting to blur around the edges. "Hey, Claire." "Yeah. I'm sorry. About the dinner. About everything." "No." She pulled back to look at him directly. "I'm sorry. My father was wrong. Everything he said was wrong. And I should have fought harder, should have—" "Claire." Ethan managed a weak smile. "Maybe we could have this conversation when I'm not about to pass out." "Oh, God." She looked around frantically. "Medic! I need a medic over here." The paramedics returned, more insistent this time. They loaded Ethan onto a stretcher despite his protests, started an IV, put the oxygen mask on his face. As they wheeled him toward the ambulance, he saw the building, the West Wing, fully engulfed. Now fire crews still fighting the blaze. He saw the people he'd saved wrapped in blankets being treated by paramedics. Alive. All of them alive. "Wait," he gasped through the oxygen mask. "My son. Noah. Someone needs to—" "I'll get him," Claire said, walking beside the stretcher. "I'll bring him to the hospital, I promise. And Miller. Tell Miller I'm okay." "I will. Just rest now." The ambulance doors closed. Through the window, Ethan watched Claire standing in the parking lot, covered in soot tears, streaking her face, one hand raised in a small wave. Then the ambulance pulled away, and the darkness pulled him under. He woke in a hospital bed, throat-raw hands wrapped in bandages, an IV in his arm. The clock on the wall said it was past 7. Evening light filtered through the window. "Dad," Noah's voice. Ethan turned his head carefully and saw his son sitting in a chair beside the bed, eyes red from crying. A woman's blazer draped over his shoulders. "Hey, buddy," Ethan rasped. "You're awake." Noah launched himself at the bed, stopping just short of crashing into Ethan. "You scared me so bad. Claire called the school and picked me up and told me what happened. And I thought, I'm okay." Ethan lifted one bandaged hand to Noah's shoulder. "Just a little crispy around the edges." "That's not funny." little bit funny. Dad, Noah's voice broke. Why do you keep doing this, running into fires, saving people? Ethan looked at his son, 8 years old and forced to grow up too fast, sitting in a hospital room for the second time in a month wearing a borrowed jacket that smelled like expensive perfume. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. And because I want you to grow up in a world where people help each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Noah sniffled, wiped his eyes with the sleeve of Claire's jacket. Claire said you saved 15 people. 13, plus 2 who were unconscious. She said you're a hero. Don't say you're just a mechanic, Noah interrupted fiercely. Don't say it's what anyone would do. Because it's not. It's what you do. Because you're brave and good, and I don't care what that mean rich man said, you're amazing. Ethan's throat tightened, and it had nothing to do with smoke inhalation. The door opened and Claire slipped in carrying 2 cups of coffee. She stopped when she saw Ethan was awake. You're up, she said softly. How do you feel? Like I swallowed a campfire. The doctor said your lungs look okay. Minor burns on your hands and arms. You were lucky. She set the coffee down and pulled up another chair. The people you saved, they're all going to be fine. The man who was unconscious woke up an hour ago. He asked about you. That's good. Good? Claire's voice rose slightly. Ethan, you pulled 15 people from a burning building. You saved their lives. That's not good, it's extraordinary. Anyone would have... No. The word came out sharp. Stop saying that. Stop diminishing what you did. You saw people in danger, and you didn't hesitate, didn't wait for someone else to handle it. You just acted. That's not normal. That's heroic. Ethan looked at her, really looked. She'd cleaned up since the factory, no more soot on her face, her hair down around her shoulders, but she looked exhausted, like she'd been crying, like she'd been scared. How long have you been here? He asked. Since they brought you in. 6 hours maybe. She saw his expression. Noah needed someone. Miller's here too, down in the cafeteria. We've been taking turns sitting with you. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. Claire leaned forward, her eyes intense. Because you matter, Ethan. To Noah, to Miller, to those 15 people you saved today. To me. The room went quiet except for the beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital. I can't go back to that world, Ethan said finally. Your father's world. The fancy dinners and the people who look at me like I'm something they stepped in. I tried, and I don't fit. I know. Claire's voice was gentle. And I was wrong to push you into it. My father was cruel, and I should have defended you better. But Ethan... She took a breath. What if you didn't have to fit into his world? What if you could build your own... With what good intentions and napkin sketches? With those sketches, yes. And with my help. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. I've been working on something, since the dinner. Since my father made it clear he wouldn't support you. She opened the folder. Inside were documents, professional and official looking. I have my own money, Claire said, from my mother's side of the family, a trust that my father can't touch. And I've been talking to engineers, manufacturers, people who actually care about innovation over profit margins. People who looked at your designs and saw what I saw, potential to save lives. Ethan stared at the documents. He saw his sketches professionally rendered. Technical specifications, cost analyses, prototype timelines. What is this? It's an offer. Claire met his eyes. Not charity, not pity, a real partnership. You design safety systems that actually work. I handle the business side, funding, manufacturing, distribution. We split everything 50-50, equal partners. Claire, before you say no, listen, today proved something. You don't hesitate when people need help. You run toward danger, not away from it. That's who you are. But Ethan, her voice softened. What if you could save people without risking your life every time? What if your designs could prevent accidents before they happen? How many lives could you save then? Noah was watching his father with wide, hopeful eyes. "Let me help you do this," Claire said quietly. "Not because you saved my life and I owe you. Because you showed me what real courage looks like. Because your ideas deserve to exist in the world. Because—" She stopped, swallowed. "Because I believe in you." Ethan looked at the folder at the sketches that had been just dreams a month ago. He thought about Richard Donovan's dismissal about Sarah leaving because he wasn't enough, about all the times he'd told himself to aim lower. Dream smaller, accept less. He thought about 15 people alive tonight because he'd refused to accept that some problems were too big to solve. "I have one condition," he said. "Anything. Noah's college fund. Whatever profit I make, half of it goes into a trust for his education. No exceptions." Claire smiled. "Deal. And I keep my job at Miller's, at least part-time. I'm not walking away from steady work until this thing proves itself." "Reasonable?" "And no more fancy dinners with your father. I'll work with you, but I'm done trying to impress people who've already decided I'm not worth their time." "I wouldn't ask you to." Claire extended her hand. "So, is that a yes?" Ethan looked at her hand steady, certain offering him a chance he'd never thought he'd have. He looked at Noah, who was practically vibrating with excitement. He thought about the people in the factory alive, because someone had refused to wait for permission to help. He took her hand. "Yeah, it's a yes." Noah cheered, jumping up and down. Claire laughed, and the sound was bright with relief and joy. And Ethan, lying in a hospital bed with bandaged hands and smoke-damaged lungs, felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Hope. Real, tangible hope that maybe, just maybe, his life could be more than survival. That those sketches could become reality. That he could build something that mattered. "Thank you," he said to Claire, "for not giving up on me." She squeezed his hand gently. "You didn't just save my life that night on the highway. You showed me what it means to actually live it. So no, Ethan. Thank you." Outside the hospital window, the sun was setting over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, 15 families were sitting down to dinner with loved ones who'd almost died today. Somewhere out there, a factory still smoldered, a reminder of how quickly everything could change. But in this room, in this moment, 3 people sat together in quiet understanding. A mechanic who'd dared to dream, a woman who'd learned what really mattered, and a boy who'd watched his father prove again and again that heroism wasn't about wealth or status or degrees. It was about showing up, about doing what's right even when it's hard, about refusing to let fear win. The hospital released Ethan 2 days later with prescriptions for pain medication he couldn't afford and instructions to rest that he couldn't follow. Bills didn't stop coming just because you played hero, and the garage had cars backed up waiting for repairs. But when he tried to return to work that first Monday, Miller met him at the door with crossed arms and a stubborn expression. "Turn around," the old man said. "I'm fine. Your hands are wrapped in bandages and you can barely talk without coughing. You're about as fine as a screen door on a submarine." Miller pointed back at Ethan's truck. "Go home. I've got Tommy covering your shifts this week." "I can't afford—" "You're still getting paid," Miller interrupted. "And before you argue, the answer is no. You pulled 15 people from a burning building, Ethan. The least I can do is give you a few days to heal." Ethan wanted to argue, but the truth was, his hands hurt like hell, and breathing deeply felt like inhaling razor blades. "1 week," he conceded. "Then I'm back. We'll see." So Ethan went home to his small house with the sagging porch and spent the week doing something he hadn't done in years. Nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. He sat at the kitchen table with his sketches spread out, refining designs, while Noah did homework beside him and tried to believe that Claire's offer was real. She called every day, sometimes twice. Updates on the partnership paperwork, questions about technical specifications, casual check-ins to make sure he was healing. The conversations started professional and ended personal. Her telling him about board meetings where she had to fight her father's skepticism, him sharing stories about Noah's latest science project. "He's building a model bridge," Ethan said during one call watching Noah arrange popsicle sticks on the table. "Claims it can hold 50 pounds. "Can it?" Claire asked. "Probably. Kid's got natural engineering instincts." Pride crept into Ethan's voice. "Gets it from his old man." "I don't think you're old," Claire said softly. 32 isn't old. Feels old some days. I know the feeling. I'm only 23 and my father treats me like I'm 12. She paused. He saw the news coverage. About the factory. About you. Ethan's stomach tightened. And he didn't say anything, which for Richard Donovan is practically a standing ovation. Claire laughed, but it was edged with frustration. He's never been good at admitting when he's wrong. Must run in the family. Excuse me? You spent 3 weeks trying to get me to accept your help. Seems like stubbornness might be genetic. Claire laughed for real this time. Okay, that's fair, but at least my stubbornness is channeled toward good causes. Is that what I am? A good cause? You're a brilliant engineer who deserves a chance to use his gifts. Her voice turned serious. And you're someone who runs toward danger when everyone else runs away. That's rare, Ethan. That matters. After she hung up, Ethan sat with the phone in his hand, thinking about the way she'd said his name. Like it meant something. Noah looked up from his bridge. You like her? What? Claire, you like her. Noah grinned. You smile different when you talk to her. I do not. Do too. It's okay, Dad. She's nice. And she thinks you're smart. She's my business partner, Ethan said firmly. That's all. Noah just smiled and went back to his popsicle sticks, and Ethan tried very hard not to think about the fact that his 8-year-old son might be right. The partnership documents arrived by courier 3 weeks later, official binding exactly as Claire had promised. 50-50 split on all profits, equal decision-making authority provisions for Noah's education fund, built right into the contract. Ethan read it 3 times, certain there had to be a catch. There wasn't. He signed it at his kitchen table with a pen that was running out of ink, and just like that, Ethan Miles became a business owner. The first prototype took 4 months to build. Claire arranged access to a small manufacturing facility outside the city, hired 2 engineers who actually listened when Ethan explained his designs, and somehow navigated the nightmare of patents and safety certifications that made Ethan's head spin. He split his time between Miller's garage and the workshop, still refusing to quit his day job until the business proved sustainable. Most nights he came home exhausted, covered in different kinds of grease car oil, at the garage machine lubricant at the workshop. But there was a lightness to the exhaustion. He was building something, creating instead of just fixing. Noah noticed the change immediately. You're happier, he said one evening watching Ethan sketch modifications to the brake system at the kitchen table. Am I? Yeah. You smile more, even when you're tired. Noah set down his math homework. Is it because of the business or because of Claire? The business, Ethan said quickly. Too quickly. Because the truth was more complicated. Yes, seeing his designs take physical form was incredible. But Claire's visits to the workshop had become the highlight of his week. She'd show up in jeans and a sweater, pull her hair back and spend hours asking questions, taking notes, learning the technical details with genuine fascination. Explain the hydraulic pressure distribution again, she'd say, leaning over his shoulder to study a schematic. I want to understand it the way you do. And he'd explain, watching her face light up when she grasped a particularly complex concept, feeling something dangerous bloom in his chest every time she smiled at him. It wasn't just the workshop visits. Claire started coming to the garage too on Saturday mornings when Noah had soccer practice. She'd bring coffee and pastries from the expensive bakery downtown and sit on an overturned crate watching Ethan work. Don't you have better things to do on weekends? he asked once, elbow deep in an engine. Probably, but this is more interesting. She sipped her coffee. My father spends his Saturdays at the country club. I'd rather watch you rebuild a transmission. You have strange taste in entertainment. Or maybe I just appreciate competence when I see it. The easy companionship surprised him. Claire didn't act like someone who'd grown up with money. She asked questions without condescension, laughed at his jokes, wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. Once she helped him replace a tire, her designer jeans stained with road grime, looking more genuinely happy than he'd ever seen her at those fancy dinners. My father would have a heart attack if he saw me right now, she said, tightening lug nuts with the impact wrench. Then let's take a photo, Ethan suggested. She laughed bright and free, and something in Ethan's chest cracked open. He was falling for her. Slowly, inevitably, terrifyingly. Every Saturday morning, every phone call, every moment she looked at him like he was someone worth knowing, it pulled him deeper. But he couldn't act on it. The gap between their worlds was still there, invisible, but real. She was a Donovan heir to a fortune, educated and cultured, and destined for bigger things than a mechanic from Millbrook. And he was, Dad, Claire's here. Ethan looked up from the carburetor he'd been cleaning to see Noah running into the garage, Claire following with Noah's backpack over her shoulder. Sorry to interrupt, she said. Noah forgot this at the workshop yesterday. Thought he might need it for school tomorrow. I told you I could get it later, Noah said, but he was grinning. And I told you I was coming this way anyway. Claire ruffled his hair. How's the bridge project coming? Finished? Want to see it? Absolutely. They disappeared into the back office, Noah chattering excitedly. Ethan cleaned his hands and followed, finding them huddled over Noah's popsicle stick bridge like it was a work of art. The weight distribution is perfect, Claire was saying seriously. And I love how you reinforce the center span. Very clever. Noah beamed. Dad helped with the calculations. I'm sure he did. Claire looked up at Ethan, and the warmth in her eyes made his breath catch. You're raising an engineer. Trying to. She stayed for dinner. It wasn't planned. Noah invited her, and she accepted before Ethan could figure out a polite way to object. So they had spaghetti again, the cheap kind at his wobbly kitchen table, with the vinyl tablecloth that had seen better days. Claire ate like it was a 5-star meal. This is really good, she said, twirling pasta on her fork. It's from a box. So it's still good. She smiled at Noah. Your dad's a better cook than our private chef. All Marcus knows how to make is things I can't pronounce. You have a private chef. Noah's eyes went wide. Unfortunately, he makes food that looks pretty but doesn't taste like anything. Claire leaned in conspiratorially. Between you and me, I sneak out for burgers at least once a week. Noah giggled, and Ethan felt his heart do something complicated. This Claire at his table making his son laugh eating boxed spaghetti, like it was a privilege, this was dangerous. This made him hope for things that couldn't happen. After dinner, Noah challenged Claire to a board game. They played for an hour, Noah winning decisively, Claire claiming he'd cheated but unable to prove it. When it was time for bed, Noah hugged her goodnight. Thanks for bringing my backpack, he said. Anytime. Claire hugged him back. Sleep well, engineer. Ethan walked her to her car, a newer model, sleek but not ostentatious. She'd traded the sports car for something sensible after the accident. Thank you, Ethan said. For tonight. You didn't have to stay. I wanted to. Claire leaned against her car door. Your life, it's real. Grounded. My world is all artifice and appearances. Being here reminds me what actually matters. Boxed spaghetti. She laughed. Family, connection, people who care about each other without calculation. Her expression sobered. You don't know how rare that is. Claire? The prototype's ready, she said, changing the subject. I was going to tell you tomorrow, but since I'm here, the engineers finished assembly this afternoon. We can test it next week. Ethan's pulse jumped. Really? Really, and I've arranged for some automotive journalists to observe. If it works when it works, we'll have coverage, credibility. She smiled. Your design is going to change the industry, Ethan. Our design, he corrected. Equal partners, remember. Partners. She extended her hand, formal and teasing. He shook it, hyper-aware of her fingers against his, the way she didn't immediately pull away. They stood there in the driveway, hands clasped, the porch light casting shadows across her face. Ethan, she said softly. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you really say yes to the partnership? She looked up at him. It wasn't just the business opportunity, so what was it? He should have said something safe, something about the designs, about wanting to help people, about Noah's future. But standing there with her hand in his, Ethan found himself telling the truth. Because you looked at me and saw something worth saving, he said quietly. Not just in that car on the highway, but here in my life. You saw potential where everyone else saw failure, and He stopped, swallowed. I needed someone to believe in me, even if I didn't deserve it. You deserve it, Claire said fiercely. You deserve all of it and more. She was standing very close now. Close enough that he could see the small scar on her forehead, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. Close enough to see the way her breath had quickened. Claire. He said her name, almost a warning. I know. She stepped back, breaking the moment. I should go. It's late. She drove away, and Ethan stood in the driveway long after her taillights disappeared, his hand still warm where she'd held it. The prototype test was scheduled for a Wednesday morning at a private track outside the city. Claire arranged for 4 automotive journalists to attend, along with the 2 engineers who'd helped build it, and a representative from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Ethan barely slept the night before. This was it, the moment his sketches became reality, when they'd prove the design worked, or watch it fail spectacularly in front of people who could make or break their credibility. He arrived at the track at dawn, Claire already there with coffee, and that determined expression he'd come to recognize. Ready? She asked. Terrified. Good. That means you care. She handed him the coffee. The journalists arrive in an hour. The test vehicle is prepped. It's all you now. The next 2 hours were a blur. Ethan explained the braking system to skeptical journalists, answered technical questions from the NHTSA rep, triple-checked every connection and pressure valve. When it was finally time for the demonstration, his hands were shaking. They'd installed the system in a standard sedan. The test was simple, high-speed braking under emergency conditions, simulating the kind of panic stop that caused most accidents. The standard system would be tested first as a control, then Ethan's enhanced version. The control test went as expected. The car stopped, but with the slight pull to the left that Ethan had diagnosed months ago at Richard Donovan's dinner table. Then came Ethan's system. The test driver accelerated to 60 miles per hour, then slammed the brakes. The car stopped perfectly straight, the hydraulic pressure distributing exactly as Ethan had designed, the fail-safe redundancy, ensuring complete control. It worked. One of the journalists actually applauded. The NHTSA rep studied his instruments with a furrowed brow, then looked up with something like respect. Stopping distance improved by 9%. No deviation from center. Hydraulic pressure perfectly balanced. He shook Ethan's hand. This is excellent work, Mr. Miles. Claire was crying when she hugged him right there in front of everyone. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. The article hit 3 days later in Automotive Engineering Weekly, The Miracle Mechanic, How a Small-Town Genius is Revolutionizing Vehicle Safety. They'd used a photo of Ethan at the track, explaining the system to journalists, Claire standing proudly beside him. The story went viral. National news picked it up. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to the mechanic who'd saved a millionaire's daughter and was now saving lives with his innovations. Ethan hated the attention, but endured the interviews because Claire asked him to. And in every interview, she made sure the reporters knew equal partners, shared credit, mutual innovation. "Ethan's the genius," she told a CNN reporter. "I just help him navigate the business side." "And you're the one who believed in it," Ethan added, refusing to let her diminish her role. "None of this happens without you." The orders started coming in. Automotive manufacturers wanting to license the technology. Safety organizations requesting consultations. Investment firms offering capital for expansion. Within 6 months, they'd outgrown the small workshop. Claire found a property in Millbrook, an old warehouse that had once been a machine shop, with good bones and enough space to grow. "What do you think?" she asked, standing in the empty building with Ethan. He looked around at the space, imagining equipment and workstations, a real engineering lab, a place to bring his designs to life. "I think it's perfect," he said, "but we can't afford—" "We can now." Claire pulled out her phone, showed him the balance in their business account. 6 figures and growing. Ethan stared at the number, unable to process it. "That's real. That's real. And it's just the beginning." She turned to face him. "So here's what I'm thinking. We renovate this space, build a proper facility, hire more engineers, expand the product line. You focus on design, I handle operations. We build something that lasts." "Miles and Donovan Engineering," Ethan said, testing the words. "Actually, I was thinking Donovan and Miles." Claire smiled. "Alphabetical order. Partners should be equals." He looked at her directly. "Miles and Donovan, or no deal." She laughed and extended her hand. "Miles and Donovan it is." They shook on it in that empty warehouse, and Ethan felt the future shift, possibilities expanding like a blueprint unfurling. The renovation took 3 months. They worked alongside the contractors, Claire in jeans and work boots, Ethan designing the layout for maximum efficiency. Noah came after school doing homework in what would become the office, sometimes helping paint walls or organize tools. The official opening was scheduled for a Saturday in June. Small ceremony, just friends and local press. But on Friday night, Claire showed up at Ethan's house with a bottle of champagne and an envelope. "I wanted to give you this before tomorrow," she said, sitting at his kitchen table. "Just us." Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was the official partnership document, professionally printed and bound. Their names on the cover, Miles and Donovan Engineering, LLC. Equal partners, just as promised. But there was something else, a handwritten note in Claire's elegant script. "Read it later," she said quickly, suddenly shy. "After I leave. It's just, I wanted you to know what this means to me. What you mean to me." "Claire, let me say this." She took a breath. "You didn't just save my life that night on the highway. You gave it meaning. Before the accident, I was drifting, following my father's plans, living someone else's dream. But you showed me what real purpose looks like. You run toward danger to help people. You design things that save lives. You raise your son to be kind and smart and brave. You're everything I was taught success should look like, but you have none of the things my father values. And that made me realize I'd been measuring my life with the wrong ruler." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "You showed me something too," he said quietly. "You made me believe my life wasn't over, that those sketches weren't just fantasies, that I could be more than—" He stopped, the words catching. "Sarah left because she wanted more than I could give. Said I'd wasted my potential, that I was stuck. And I believed her. I thought this was all I'd ever be, a mechanic barely scraping by, raising my kid alone, trying not to want anything more. But you looked at me and saw someone worth investing in, worth believing in. You can't know what that did for me." Claire's eyes were wet. "So we saved each other." "Guess we did." She stood, came around the table, and hugged him. Not a professional embrace, not gratitude, something deeper, more real. Ethan wrapped his arms around her and let himself feel what he'd been denying for months. He was in love with her. Completely, impossibly in love. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. "Tomorrow's going to be amazing. Our company, our dream, everything we built together. It's all real now. It's all real, he agreed. After she left, Ethan read the note. Ethan, you once asked why I wouldn't forget about you. The truth is simple. You reminded me what courage looks like. Not the kind that comes from privilege or power, but the kind that comes from choosing to help even when it costs you everything. You could have driven past that night. You could have refused my partnership. You could have stayed safe instead of running into that burning building. But you didn't. You never do. And that's changed me in ways I'm still discovering. Thank you for saving my life twice, once from fire, once from meaninglessness. Claire. The opening ceremony the next day was everything they'd hoped. Local officials came, the mayor gave a speech, journalists took photos. Miller closed the garage for the afternoon and showed up in a suit, proud as a father at graduation. Noah wore his best clothes and gave a tour of the facility to anyone who'd listen. But the moment Ethan remembered most came at the end, when everyone else had left and it was just him, Claire, and Noah standing in the new workshop. Above the main door, Claire had commissioned a sign. Brushed metal, clean lines, professional. Miles and Donovan Engineering. And underneath in smaller letters a quote that made Ethan's eyes burn, built by hands that once saved a life. When did you? He started. Last week. I wanted it to be a surprise. Claire looked at the sign with satisfaction. It's true after all. Everything here exists because you saved me. Everything here exists because you believed in me. Then I guess that makes us even. Noah tugged on Ethan's sleeve. Dad, are you crying? Little bit, yeah. Happy crying or sad crying? Ethan looked around the workshop, the equipment they'd purchased, the drafting tables where future designs would be created, the clean white walls ready to be filled with innovation. He looked at Claire standing in a beam of afternoon sunlight, smiling at him with something that looked dangerously like love. He looked at his son growing up in a world where dreams could actually come true if you worked hard and found the right people to believe in you. Happy crying, Ethan said, pulling Noah into a hug. Definitely happy crying. 6 months later, Miles and Donovan Engineering had 12 employees and contracts with 3 major automotive manufacturers. Ethan still worked part-time at Miller's. Some habits were hard to break, but most of his days were spent designing, innovating, creating safety systems that would save lives he'd never meet. Claire had an office in the facility, but she spent most of her time in the workshop, learning the technical side with the same determination she brought to everything. She'd cut ties with her father's company, choosing to build something on her own terms. Noah thrived, his science projects getting more sophisticated, his dreams expanding. He talked about MIT now, about becoming an engineer like his dad, about designing things that mattered. And late at night, when the facility was empty and the only light came from the lamp on Ethan's drafting table, Claire would bring coffee and sit beside him while he sketched. "What are you working on?" she'd ask, and he'd explain, and she'd listen, and the space between them would shrink until sometimes, just sometimes, their hands would brush, their eyes would meet, and the air would crackle with possibility. They hadn't defined what they were to each other. Business partners, definitely. Friends, certainly. But there was something more, something growing in the spaces between words, in the Saturday mornings at the garage, and the late nights at the workshop, and the way Claire looked at Noah, like he was already hers. Ethan told himself to be patient, to let it develop naturally, to not rush something that felt important and fragile and absolutely terrifying. But on a Tuesday evening in November, when Claire showed up at his house with takeout and that smile that made his heart stumble, Noah looked up from his homework and said, "Claire, when are you going to move in with us?" Ethan choked on his water. "Noah, what? She's here all the time anyway, and she makes you happy, and I like her." Noah looked at Claire seriously. "Don't you like us?" Claire's face had gone pink. "I like you very much." "Then why don't you live here? We have room. Dad could fix up the spare bedroom, unless—" Noah's eyes widened with sudden understanding. Unless you want to share a room with Dad, that's okay too. Mom had her own room before she left, but you're not like Mom, so... Noah. Ethan's face was burning. That's enough. But Claire was laughing that bright free sound that made everything better. You know what, I think Noah's onto something. Ethan looked at her in shock. What? Not the moving in part. Not yet anyway. She set down her coffee and crossed to where Ethan stood frozen in the kitchen. But the part about us being more than business partners, that part he's right about. Claire, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I want to. She took his hand the same way she had that night in the driveway months ago. Ethan Miles, you saved my life, changed my world, and showed me what real courage looks like. And somewhere along the way, I fell completely in love with you. Noah gasped. Ethan's heart stopped. You, he started. Love you. Yes, I do. Claire's hand tightened on his. And I know there are a million reasons why this is complicated. Your life, my family, the business, everything. But I also know that I've never felt more myself than when I'm with you and Noah. That I'd rather eat boxed spaghetti at this table than have a 5-course meal anywhere else. That when I imagine my future, you're in every version of it. Ethan couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stand there while the woman he loved told him everything he'd been too afraid to hope for. Say something, Claire whispered. I love you too. Ethan said the words he'd been holding back for months, finally breaking free. So much it scares me. You're brilliant and kind, and you see the best in people even when they can't see it themselves. You gave me back my dreams. You made me believe I could be more. And His voice cracked. I never thought someone like you could love someone like me. Someone like you is exactly who I love, Claire said. The hands that save lives, the mind that creates solutions, the heart that raises Noah to be extraordinary. That's you, Ethan, all of you. And I love every part. This is the best day ever, Noah announced from the table. They both laughed, and then Claire was kissing him soft and certain, and Ethan was kissing her back, pouring months of longing and hope and absolute terror into the connection. When they finally pulled apart, Noah was grinning. Does this mean we're a family now? He asked. Claire looked at Ethan, then at Noah, her eyes bright with tears. If you'll have me. Yes, Ethan and Noah said together. The future unfolded slowly, beautifully. Claire didn't move in right away. They took their time building their relationship alongside their business. But she was there most evenings, helping with homework, making dinner, filling the house with laughter that had been absent too long. Miles and Donovan Engineering continued to grow. They hired more engineers, expanded the product line, opened a second facility. The designs they created saved lives, provably, measurably. The industry called Ethan the miracle mechanic. But he was just a man who'd refused to accept that his dreams were too big. Noah got older, smarter, more confident. He wore the company logo on his backpack, told his friends his dad was changing the world, dreamed about joining the family business someday. And on a spring morning, 2 years after that first partnership handshake, Ethan stood in his workshop, their workshop, and looked at what they'd built. State-of-the-art equipment, talented engineers, designs that would save thousands of lives. A business born from catastrophe and built on belief. The sign above the door still read, "Built by hands that once saved a life." But now Ethan understood it meant more than that night on the highway. It meant all of it, every moment of courage, every decision to help instead of hide, every time someone chose to believe instead of doubt. Claire found him there, wrapped her arms around him from behind, rested her head against his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything." Ethan turned in her embrace. "That night on Route 17, your father's dining room, the factory fire, the first prototype test, Noah asking when you're moving in. That was pretty bold of him. He gets it from his dad." Ethan smiled. "I was thinking how none of this should have happened. How one decision changed everything. How I almost drove past that accident. But you didn't. No, I didn't. He kissed her forehead, the small scar barely visible now. Best decision I ever made. Second best, Claire corrected. The best was saying yes to the partnership. Pretty sure falling in love with you ranks higher. Well, when you put it that way. She smiled that beautiful smile that had become home. Though I'd argue I'm the one who made the best decision tracking down a grumpy mechanic who told me to leave him alone. I wasn't grumpy. You absolutely were. Are sometimes. But I love you anyway. They stood together in the workshop they'd built, surrounded by designs that existed because someone had believed when it was easier to doubt, because courage had won over fear, because two broken people had found each other in the wreckage and decided to build something beautiful. Outside, Noah was showing visitors around the facility proud and confident, growing into the man his father had always hoped he'd become. Above the door, the sign caught the morning light. Built by hands that once saved a life. But Ethan knew the truth now. They'd saved each other again and again in all the ways that mattered. And they'd keep saving each other, keep building together, keep proving that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the simplest choice: to stop, to help, to believe, to dare to hope that broken things can be fixed and dreams can become real and love can bridge any gap if you're brave enough to reach across it. The mechanic with grease-stained hands and the millionaire's daughter had built something that would outlast them both, not just a business, but a legacy of innovation and compassion, proof that when you measure success by lives saved instead of dollars earned, everyone wins. And in a small house with a sagging porch that Claire helped Ethan finally fix, a family sat down to dinner, boxed spaghetti, because some traditions were worth keeping, and laughed and dreamed and loved each other exactly as they were. The miracle wasn't the rescue or the designs or the success. The miracle was this: two people from different worlds finding common ground in courage, building a future from the ashes of the past, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we choose to stop running and start believing. That was the real story. That was what mattered. That was home.